And actually, it wasn't a couple. It was a mom, and it looked like a little boy. And they had left one store, and they were coming out of the store, and the mom was just crying. Just crying, you know? And she takes the little boy, and she puts him in the car, and the husband was in the driver's seat. And the wife says something to the husband. Fred can't really quite see. Says something to the husband, and the husband goes, you know, and she goes, And the husband goes, And she goes, And the husband gets out of the car, slams the door, goes back in the store where they came from. It was actually a barber shop, and picks up a lock of hair from the floor, brings it back, gives it to the mom. They look over at Fred, surprise, and they drive off. This little boy got his first haircut. And the mom just saw her little baby growing up. And it's not that she didn't want her baby to grow up, but she didn't want to trade him in on this nubby-headed little boy. I mean, she wanted to, you know. And so even good things that happen, we can grieve a loss of that. We can grieve a loss of that. And then when somebody dies, we can grieve a loss of that. And here's what happens with grief. Grief happens when something we love leaves, right? Something we love is not there anymore. Even if it's a little baby becoming a boy or a young lady. But when that produces a vacuum, when somebody we love dies, it produces a hole in our hearts. When a marriage ends, it produces a vacuum within us that needs to be filled with something. You know, that saying, nature abhors a vacuum. It's true in our spiritual life too. That when there is a vacuum in our heart, it needs to be filled with something. And what most people fill it with is, first of all, angry. They will be angry. They are angry that this has gone on and that that loss is there. And they fill their hearts with anger, right? Or they they'll take that anger and instead of being mad at everybody, they'll turn it in on themselves. They'll cover their anger. They won't be mad at everybody else in the world. They won't lash out. But they'll turn their anger inside. And instead of lashing out, they'll turn their anger and put it in that hole. And anger turned inwards is the definition of depression. Anger turned inward is depression. And so people will become depressed. Okay? Now the third thing that you can do is you can fill that hole with God. You can fill that hole with God's grace. That you can recognize that there's a loss there. But let God come in and fill that hole. How do you do that? Well, let me give you an example. My mom died in March, and so, you know, there was a lot of grief involved there, but I was busy doing things. But I went over to her house. I think I told y'all this not long ago. I went over to her house. There was nobody there, just me. And I walked in the house, and I just walked from room to room thinking of different things that my mom had done. And I missed her. She was just a great lady. And in each room, I cried. I just cried in each room. And what I did is I let that vacuum be a vacuum. I let it be an open space. And what it filled with was not anger, but a recognition that I had a mom that was wonderful, and I'm sad because I will miss her. And that it was a remarkable gift that God gave me, is having her as a mom. And as I cried those tears of grief, my heart was filled with love. Right? My heart was just filled with love. And tears of sorrow became tears of joy. In that one moment that I was there at my mom's house, weeping for her loss, at the end I was weeping with a smile on my face. Literally. Because I was such a blessed guy to have a mom like that. And that's a God thing. God comes in and takes the sorrow and turns it into joy. And sometimes it's not joy, sometimes it's relief or release. or something else. But if you turn that hurt into anger, that thing can fester for years. And if you turn it in on yourself, or you're mad at yourself, and you think of all the things you did wrong in those relationships, and you're just, I beat yourself up and spend your life beating yourself up, that's exactly what will happen. But if you take that wound to God and open it up and say, man, here it is. Here it is. God comes in, and he'll turn those tears of sorrow into tears of joy when he fills that vacuum with his grace. Christ is familiar with our wounds. And when we share our wounds with him, he helps lift the load. Look at this scripture. It's a prophecy about Christ and his suffering. He was despised and rejected by men. A man of, what's that word? Sorrows. A man of sorrows. And familiar with suffering. Like one from whom men hide their faces, he was despised, and we esteemed him not. Surely he took up our infirmities and carried our sorrows. Carried our sorrows. Man, that's who Jesus is. But when you're carrying your sorrows alone, they're just too heavy. But when you stand before God and you let those tears of sorrow flow out and you let that vacuum be there before the creator of the universe, God will fill that vacuum because he's acquainted with sorrow, and God steps into the sorrow, and heals that. God really does that. He will heal that. And you walk through your life differently because of the experience that you had. But you walk through life better because of what God has done. And if you swallow that anger, then you will not be better, you will be bitter. Tell you what, whenever there's a hurt in your life, you will either become better or bitter. One or the other. You don't stay the same. When there is pain in your life, you do not stay the same. You will either be bitter or get better. And the only way to get better is to take that wound to God, cry those tears with him, and let him step into the sorrow with you and lift you up. And there is gain from that pain. Lastly, I gain with pain when my pain is for love's sake. When my pain is for love's sake. Love can be a tricky thing. We think we're sacrificing for other people, but a lot of times what we're doing is making ourselves feel better. Love, here's my definition of love. Love is a willingness to sacrifice for the spiritual well-being of another. The willingness to sacrifice for the spiritual well-being of another. Does it mean I sacrifice all the time? Nope. You know, I've got my kids and my wife, and most of my life isn't a sacrifice. It's one of just absolute bliss and joy. But would I be willing to sacrifice for them? Absolutely. What? Me? I'd be willing to sacrifice my life for them. A willingness to sacrifice for the spiritual well-being of another is the definition of love. Now, here's where it gets tricky. Sometimes I can want something from someone, and it can be disguised as love. I may want my son's affection and remind them of what a wonderful dad I am, so he'll be appreciative and loving towards me. Now, does that mean sacrificing anything? No. It's me being selfish. But sacrifice says, I may let him go on his own, even though I want to be there every step of the way to fight every battle for him. That's not love. That's a selfishness that says, you know, I'm the person who needs to fight your battles. In the process, I never let them grow up because battles have to be fought in this life. And so sometimes a loving thing to do means I pull back and it hurts because I'm willing to sacrifice for the